People come when they have a specific conflict they're thinking about right now. Are you sitting next to that person? You can just kind of wink and you don't have to raise your hand. So, we are recording this, so a lot of times I talk about the patent issue, and I tell people, like, please don't bring up your conflicts in public, because sometimes people would be like, my friend's company is being sued, and I'm like, we're recording. That's a terrible idea. So maybe think of, we're recording this one too, so you might consider that as well, if you have questions, when we get to the end. Let's see. Oh, it looks like we're at 1:45, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is a talk about handling conflict like a boss. Not like a boss who's like a bossy person, but like, yeah, I did that correctly. I felt confident. I have some confidence that I did the right thing. So it doesn't necessarily mean telling people what to do, in case there was any confusion about that. Let's start this with a story. I used to have two roommates many years ago, and we had a landline telephone. Some of you probably remember those. Or maybe they have them here at the school, right? I'm not sure. But so I had two roommates, and we'll call them Alice and Bob, because the way social media is, you're never like disconnected from anyone anymore, right? So Alice had paid our electric bill and wanted Bob to give her his portion of the bill. And so she paid it on Wednesday and wanted money like immediately. So Thursday she leaves like a voicemail message for Bob. You owe me $23. Okay. Bob doesn't respond. So then we get to Thursday and she puts a sticky note on the phone like, hey, your portion of the electric bill is $23. I'd like it for the weekend. Because she was like, that's my beer money, right? And Bob still didn't respond. And I, I'm in and out, I'm busy. I gave her my money, we're cool, I'm an innocent bystander here. And then I get into the house on Friday night, and the sticky note has been joined by several more sticky notes. Like, increasingly, like, I don't know who you think you are, like, I don't appreciate your inconsiderate behavior, and, like, she ran out of room on the phone. And so there was, like, two on the wall below the phone. And so the last were pretty nasty, and I saw them, and I thought, oh, hey, Alice, I think there's some information that you don't have here. And she's like, what do you mean, that, like, Bob's a jerk? And I'm like, that he's out of state at his grandmother's funeral. And she's like, oh. All of a sudden, the inconsiderate, nasty, selfish behavior that she'd been alleging to on this string of sticky notes was put into a different context. So I went upstairs to, like, I'd just come in from work, and when I came back down, all of the sticky notes were gone. So, What I'm saying is that a lot of conflict comes from people not having all of the information, right? And we're going to talk about what kinds of information are really important, and what you can do to either help a situation where you're having conflict with someone, or you see two parties having conflict with each other. So basically, conflict happens and it needs to be handled, identifying the obvious and less obvious causes, and then some resolution strategies. First of all, conflict is natural. A lot of times you're like, oh, there's this place where we don't have conflict, which would be, I don't know where that is, but as long as we live in a multicultural society, people have different preconceptions, they have differing ideas about their obligations, different standards for what you would consider a job well done. We're going to have conflict. The idea is to have it not get so blown out of proportion that we can't go back and work together at the end of it. So it happens, and it definitely needs to be handled. One of the first things that probably makes people butt heads is having mismatched goals. So in our open source communities, sometimes someone's been there for many years, and their idea of what the project's main goal or central purpose is might be very different from someone who's come in 5 years later. or someone who works on a different part of the project, who works, on documentation versus translation versus kernel versus core, whatever it is. So the mismatched goals are going to cause people to have an idea about what the most important thing is, that it's not actually the same. So for this place, the boat and dog wash, there are folks that are like, boats and cars and stuff, like, we need to get stronger, more toxic soap. Now, people who think that we're running a dog wash are like, you're evil. Why do you hate puppies? So you can see how having like more than one idea about what the main goal of what we do here is can create some problems. So one of the first things you can do there is you're like, well, what do you think we're here for? And you might find out that you're at a dog wash when you thought you were at a boat wash. Also, I love this dog. Anyway, so the second thing you want to try and do is see if you can understand the other person. They're, like I said, they're coming from a different place than you are. They might have a different level of investment or involvement. They might have different motivations, different things that are driving their participation in your community. There's a lot of passion. Do people know what this is a picture from? No one. Oh, okay. So last year in Scotland, a group set out to do to break the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest number of Kate Bush impersonators in one place. Why? I don't know. It seemed like a good idea at the time. They got 300, and then apparently the Guinness Book of World Records was like, I don't know. Like, they didn't feel they did a good enough job of counting all the people in the Kate Bush outfits. But anyway, so sometimes people get really excited and they're doing something, and the actual activity that they're doing has kind of eclipsed the goal. And so when you have that kind of situation, you need to like, hey, let's bring it back to what our goal is here. Like, I know everyone loves wearing the GNU costume, but we are here for a purpose. We're trying to promote this project, et cetera, et cetera. So passion's one of those things that can create a little bit of mismatch, especially if people are really enjoying what they're doing, which is a good thing as long as it's channeled into a useful place. A lot of times also sometimes people will have like a high level of personal identity tied up in their involvement in your project. So maybe they've had a title for a while, like they're the webmaster, or they're like the bug triager, or Grand Poobah, whatever your project has for titles. And the project's needs have changed maybe over the last 5 or 10 years because it's technology and that happens. And so you are telling people, oh, we want to change the way we're doing stuff. And they're like, but I have always been the Hello Kitty lady. You cannot take that away from me. And then you've got a problem where you've got to like, well, what would be maybe we can find another good title for you. Or maybe the thing that you're doing, that was fantastic and lots of appreciation, but I'd love to see you move on to the next thing that's really important for us, so that you can give them something else to hang their identity on that is similar and important and well recognized and appreciated within the project. So, and then finally, you may have to go deep. Not everyone wears their passion or their, love of their particular title or role within your project on their sleeve. So sometimes you kind of have to, like, hey, let's have coffee, and I'll mostly listen. Like, how do you like volunteering here at Media Goblin? Or, whatever your project is. Tell me what you get from it. Is this a resume builder, or you're here for your friends, or you wanted to learn Python, whatever it is. If you can find out why that person is contributing to your project, then you're going to have a better understanding of where they're coming from, what things are causing them to feel itchy and be defensive. And then lastly, a word about, could we just not, I have a friend that I work on a project with, and he puts up with some kind of reprehensible behavior, and I'm always like, why don't you just tell them no, that you're not okay with it? And he's like, I hate conflict. And I'm like, you're living in like a hacker hotel with like 3 bunk beds with grown people and groping around in the dark because you don't want to piss off one super grumpy person. That's non-ideal. That was a short-term situation, which is okay, but for long-term situations, like, eventually that's going to blow up. And if you don't deal with conflict, what you end up with is people who like conflict to the exclusion of everyone else. So you're bumping along, you're in your project, and then eventually it becomes like your job to just hang out with a bunch of jerks. So that's why we have to actually take conflict and deal with it head on. But I don't say this to mean that you have to put up with terrible behavior or a project that doesn't respect you. So you want to weigh your investment. Like, if this is your life dream, then it might be worth like diving in, rolling up your sleeves and doing it. But if you just got here a week ago and you've already gotten like 3 RTFM emails, like, get in the car and go, man. They don't need you. You don't need them. Like, forget about it. So I want to make sure that you don't take away from this. I'm advocating that you go and solve all the conflicts at a project that you're not particularly invested in. So sometimes for your own health, for your own sanity, you need to just pick up and go. So identifying the causes of conflict. So people, and this includes yourself, when there's conflict, people tend to default to one of 3 modes or some sort of a hybrid of those 3 modes of dealing with conflict. So if you can recognize those modes, it can help you sort of tailor the conversation to that person's style of dealing with conflict. It also might help you become a little less staticky in your communications if you know you're like, oh, I'm doing that thing. So it can help you. I don't want to, just because you've come here doesn't mean like you're going to be perfect. Sorry, that may be next year's talk. Who knows? But right? You guys are close enough, right? Anyway, so the first strategy for dealing with conflict is avoidance, and I'm sure everyone's seen or like kind of not seen this, right? This is when a person like walks away, avoids conflict at all costs, and this can be a good strategy if like you're over at your brother's place and he and his girlfriend are having that argument again that you want nothing to do with. This is a good time to like get in the show and be like, yeah, I don't want to hear about your grocery list or whatever bedroom stuff, holy moly. No. So sometimes avoidance is okay. But if you use this strategy too often, then you start to feel disconnected and invisible in your projects. It also means that onlookers assume that you're in agreement with the group, which you might not be. So by not saying something when you see someone being really aggressive or angry or nasty to a new contributor, onlookers will assume that the quiet person is totally okay with that behavior. So avoidance is, you got to be careful how much you use that and how used to that you get. You end up, it doesn't feel good after a long time to be the person who's always avoiding any kind of interaction. And people stop looping you in on other stuff too that you might actually care about that's a little less staticky. Second strategy is accommodation. I know. I was on a dog kick this month. Accommodation is this is the person who would rather be well-liked than be considered difficult, right? And sometimes it's good to choose the group's well-being over your own specific ego. Like, maybe you're hosting a bunch of people from out of town and they want to go to the vegan pizza joint again. And you're like, well, whatever, one more night, one dinner, I can handle it. It's fine. That can be okay. But it can be bad when they compromise when they shouldn't. And this sometimes it'll look like creating a false middle. Like, so someone over here is having a tantrum that is, would make a 5-year-old jealous. And then someone over here is kind of like, could we have less shouting? And you're like, well, let's compromise. Let's just have 50% shouting tantrum time. Did that fix the problem? Probably not. And this person who, is sometimes downplaying or suppressing dissent because they just want everyone to get along, ends up eventually feeling really underappreciated because they're doing so much work to make everyone compromise, but it is always compromise, that no one is really particularly happy with the conversations they've had or the results that they've gotten out of that interaction. So that person just ends up feeling like, I do all the thankless work and you guys just don't appreciate me.
Well, it teaches the 5-year-old that they can get away with it.
That too, which is also not good. So from the group, again, you have this situation where the 5-year-old thinks their behavior is acceptable, and onlookers think that your group or your community, your project, thinks that behavior is acceptable. 50% of the time. And then finally, assertion. And some places call this aggression, and there's a spectrum. Like sometimes you have to say, no, that is not okay. Like, if your project leader comes in and is like, yeah, so we're going to do pay cuts, but just for the women. It's totally okay to be like, hell no, that's not acceptable. But, this can also easily be overused, and you see a lot of competitive, ego-driven responses to the point where everyone walks around this person like on eggshells. And they end up not being told what's going on in the rest of the project. They have no idea what anyone else is thinking, what anyone is feeling, because they're like, hey, never mind, it's cool, I'll take care of it myself. So using the aggression too much, of course, is also bad. And then they're like, why does no one like me? I get results. That's like, because you're shouty and terrible and, don't have any idea what the rest of us are thinking. This is not good. So this also doesn't look too great to onlookers for your community to be like, oh, I guess everyone over there likes being yelled at. That's weird. I'll pick a different project to get involved with. I hope, right? So those are sort of three modes of dealing with conflict. And that, coupled with more information, can help you start to resolve conflicts. So we talked about how more information can really diffuse conflict, but we'll look at some really specific types. So history is the first place. Sometimes if you're new to a project, or you're new to an area, you're new to a conversation or a thread or something, you don't have the history. You don't know that this, the Emacs versus VI thing is just going to be, it's going to be 500 posts on the emailing list for forever. And so, whoa, what did I awake? Sorry, I kicked into the whole bee's nest, and what happened? Or someone used to have a role or a responsibility or something that they don't now, and bringing it up or digging deeper on that can cause kind of aggressive, assertive behavior. Anyway, so sometimes when you find yourself in a situation where you're like, this seems to be coming from nowhere, ask someone if there's some history that you're missing. And so whatever you can find out about the history is going to help you figure out what to do going forward. Sometimes people are afraid of something that seems totally normal to you. And this can be, a number of different things. Sometimes they're afraid of losing their identity that is tied up in a particular title or a position. They're being asked to do something they haven't done before, and they're afraid they're going to fail, so they're like, throwing up all kinds. That sounds stupid. I don't think we need to use that new web framework that I don't know how to use. So, it's, so if you can find out, this one's a little trickier, asking someone is there history I'm missing? Is a little bit more innocuous than being like, what are you afraid of? But maybe you could try phrasing it I'm curious, this seems really, I feel like I'm getting more of a response than I expected to, maybe I'm not aware of everything. What do you think is the worst thing that could happen? And then listen, because listening is key. And then you might find out, let them roll until you find out what it is that they're afraid of. I don't want to lose this title. I don't want to lose this role. I don't want to lose my place in the decision-making hierarchy. I don't want to learn Django, whatever it is. Nothing against Django. And sometimes people have a motivation that is not visible to you. Something's going on, or you don't hear it or see it, but they do apparently. And this happens especially in projects where you have a mix of volunteers and paid folks. So sometimes you have someone participating in a project that has a missive or marching orders from their boss that are not the same as the rest of the people involved in the project. So maybe their boss wants them to produce certain types of metrics, come in on certain types of deadlines, measure certain kinds of ROI that the rest of the project doesn't care about, isn't aware of. And so you're having this constant who cares if we get it done for the 11th? And it's oh, wait, your boss really, you told them you made up a deadline for the rest of us? Okay. Or you've been given a deadline that the rest of us weren't aware of. So when you have this kind of a situation, the more you can find out about the other person's motivations and why they're, kind of feeling the pain points that no one else seems to be feeling, the better off. And then you can, if it's the 12th, obviously you're not going to get it done for the 11th, but you might be able to fix the process going forward. So, what do you do with all this information once you have it, right? So, first thing I would say is to try and help everyone get perspective. And sometimes this is just as simple as like, we should take this off the mailing list for 15 minutes and see if we can get on the phone, go outside, get a cup of coffee, meet in person. Just kind of like, hey, we're all, you suck, why do you keep saying this? Like, kind of like change the environment, change the perspective. Sometimes it means going back to discussing your first principles. Like, so we all agree that we're here to build an amazing operating system that's friendly to use, right? Okay, cool. And you're doing this, and you're doing this, and you're doing this. So we're all like on the same team. Why are we having this issue? And then you find out like, oh, I actually don't think like only putting our distribution out in the world in English meets our goal of building an amazing operating system that everyone wants to use. Like, oh, and someone else says like, oh, I thought it was just more efficient if we just like kept it simple. So if you can kind of figure out, like go back up to where you agree, then you can move back down to the small bits and get more, kind of overlap. Consensus is a great word. Sometimes you need to have time to get into someone else's shoes as well. And so this is one of those situations like where, we talked about if someone has motivations that the rest of the group doesn't understand, or has kind of demands or goals or accountability that are not understood. If you can make the other person understand that, so to go back to my sticky note story, like, oh, in Alice's mind, the most important thing is that I get my $23 so I can go out and drink beers on Friday. And all of a sudden finding out like, oh, actually, no, going to your grandmother's funeral is more important. I understand now that I've pictured what I would do, which is not answer all my emails or all my voicemails from my weird roommate that needs $23 while I'm out of town. Yeah, okay. All of a sudden now I understand why we're having this problem. And that goes a long way, understanding where the other person is coming from. And then you can start to find alignment and figure out like, well, if we agree on the goals and maybe leave each other alone on the specific implementation of the tactics, then we can, agree to disagree on the details, but we know we're working towards the same goal, and that's okay. Sometimes, you can help other groups do this, like, other parties outside of yourself. Sometimes it takes a little bit of like, I'm going to have to listen to some grumping and be patient and hold my tongue a little bit so that we can get to that place together. So, just a note about who is doing this work. You guys might be aware we have this weird gender imbalance in the tech industry. Okay, oh good. Nice to know no one has just crawled out from the rock this morning. So, a word about doing this work. I am in no way, shape, or form advocating that one person, particularly a female person, do all of this work in an unrecognized, unpaid fashion. I'm doing this talk to a whole room full of people because I think that if everyone does a little of this work, then it's going to be more effective. So I don't think you should have one person do all of this work inside of your project. I think it's a thing that collectively your project should be like, we'd like less conflict, so we will all try to be a little bit better about this. So I just want to, I don't want anyone to go home and be like, I decided who's going to do this in our project, and it's not me. It's someone else, and we're definitely not paying for it because, you can't put that in a GitHub repo. So that's my little PSA. So lots of things you can't put in a repo. So planning for future conflicts. Now that we agree conflict will happen and that it's natural, but that it needs to be dealt with, and we're excited to all each collectively take a tiny piece on of doing this work to make sure that we have conflicts that people can come back to the table after. Let's talk about how we plan for future ones. So first off, of course, assuming the best. And this, you have probably heard this, it's sort of, email tone, IRC tone, even with emojis. It's very hard to figure out what people, did they say like, what's going on? Did they mean like, what's going on? Or did they mean, what's going on? You don't know. You can't tell because it's text. You have no idea. But if you assume the best, then you can hopefully not start a conflict where none was intended or needed. And this happens sometimes when you have projects that are global and a word means something in one culture and has certain connotations in another that are not the same. So I would always recommend on the first pass doing a back channel, like, do you know that word means XYZ over here? Like, oh, I didn't. Wow, okay. Well, maybe we want to, keep that one out of the channel. So assuming the best means giving people room to occasionally screw up and not know everything that you know, because that would be, kind of weird. But assuming the best means that you don't expect everyone else in your project to be able to read your mind, and you accept that you also can't read their mind, and that text is fallible. Setting great expectations, of course, certainly people are familiar with the idea of codes of conduct and things like that. Put whatever you want in there, but when you set expectations for how conflicts are dealt with, how conversations happen, what kinds of activities and what kinds of behavior are acceptable, then you can always refer back like, oh no, it says right here that you can't just throw pies in people's faces when they don't like your patch. No, we all agreed to that, no pies. And it also means that, there are things that you won't put up with, that everyone is clear on what those things are. There is a lot more written about codes of conduct. If you need example codes of conduct to take a look at for your project, let me know, and we can talk about that afterwards. But this is especially when people are doing volunteer work. Like, this is not what they should have to put up with. So, bad behavior, weird conversations, like lingering discontent that's unspoken and makes everybody nervous. Not good. And then this particularly, do people know what ad hominem is? Kind of? Okay. So this is like taking a conversation about something else and turning it into a personal attack, if you're not familiar with this. This would be like, we're kind of like, should we script this in Python or Ruby? Like, well, I don't know, Python's really great, I love white space. And someone's like, well, I'm really good at Ruby, I like Ruby. And then someone's like, screw you, I think you're a dog-faced jerk because Ruby sucks. And you're like, we were having a nice conversation about white space and and various scripting languages, and now all of a sudden someone's been called a dog-faced jerk. Like, how are we going to decide what scripting language to use after that? There's no way to, like, the whole conversation has changed. And now instead of being like, we're trying to build a website and have a thing, and it's like, now we're back to 5-year-olds having tantrums on the floor and calling each other dog-faced jerks. I think this is one of those things that you have to set as far as an expectation in your project, that this is not acceptable behavior, that it is never okay to go to the ad hominem space. And I feel that very strongly, like within projects generally, like anywhere that adults are talking to each other, they should really think carefully before using ad hominem, because it makes it very hard to come back to the table. So if we just had a conversation about which scripting language is the best, you might be like, wow, she's a real Python fangirl, but what else? But if I've called you a name, it's going to be really hard for you to come back to the table and be like, okay, I guess you talked me into it. Python it is. Like, that's not going to work as well after the name calling has been unleashed. So conflict resolution amongst groups. So, here in the free software world, I think we have more in common than we have different, and yet we spend a lot of time slagging each other's licenses, each other's like community organizations, each other's technologies, each other's scripting languages, each other's like SQL or no SQL, like, you're clearly stupid and living in the past, and I think this doesn't really work out for us very well if we want to build a wider, larger, more inclusive free software movement. So first off, set an example within your own community so that you can say, like, this is how we are, and this is how we behave, how we interact with people, how we interact with the world. And then hopefully when you do end up working with other groups, you can say, like, oh yeah, you guys don't mind if we kind of have these ground rules about how we behave and how we interact with each other? That would be fantastic. So that means that if you don't want people to knock you on your technology or your license, you have to not do it to other people or other projects. I feel like a lot of times the free software movement looks like this from the outside, where there is like a fight going on in the background, and then people are like, hey, what's up? Do you want to try install disk? And it's like, huh, and they're like, what's going on over there? And it's like, oh, we're having that open source versus free software conversation again. Like, because that's, we actually like doing this more than writing code or talking to newbies or anything like that, which I think doesn't make us look very appealing to the outside. I actually had coffee with someone a while ago now, but she wanted to talk about, like, is there free and open source software that I could use at my nonprofit? I'm like, oh yeah, there totally is. And so we were talking about different stuff, about, like, office stuff and graphics programs, which are, great place to start to, begin the process of getting free and open source software into your processes. And so she's kind of like, oh, so wait, I heard there's like this argument about whether you call it free or open source. And I'm like, so you have never even heard of LibreOffice, but you know that we like to argue about whether we call it free software or open source. That's so weird. So apparently we're doing like a much louder, efficient job of getting that argument out into the public than we are of letting people know that we have some great software that they could use. So that's why I think the conflict resolution needs to also scale. So it's good to start with your project first so that you feel good and you have a great place to start from, but then it needs to kind of go group to group as well. And face-to-face is a really great way to do this. It's, when we talk to each other over email or we write blog posts on our own individual blogs about, like, I don't know why those stupid people like that programming language or whatever, it loses a little bit of something that is hard to maintain in a face-to-face. So I would encourage people to find projects, find common alignment with other projects. Like maybe you work on Inkscape and I'm working on LibreOffice, and we're like, we could do a combined thing where we go to elementary schools and teach them how to use stuff without arguing about terms or licensing or any of those things. We could just kind of put all that stuff aside and be like, we have a great common goal here, like teaching elementary school students about all the software we have. That would be fantastic. But it might need to be face-to-face so that you can kind of gauge the excitement, the sincerity, figure out when you've gotten to the alignment part. So that's my dream for the free and open source software community at large, is for us to all work together on the things we have in common. Just to recap, I went a little bit. I went a little fast, maybe too much coffee, but also we'll have time for questions and discussion, which would be great. So just to recap, conflict happens. Gathering information, figuring out what you can about the way the other party is feeling so that you can build a shared perspective is going to help you build consensus and get to a place that is productive and useful and feels nice for everyone. And then setting great expectations so that you can always refer back to, like, oh yeah, we don't do that here, or we don't behave like that to each other here, is going to help you. And you might think like, no, it's like me and my best friend since kindergarten, it's going to be great, there's never going to be any conflict. Eventually, if you're trying to get really hard, complicated stuff done, there will be conflict. So that's I would love to see us move forward, building like a free software movement full of go energy instead of stop energy. Everyone feels like, yes, we're just keep going, the sky's the limit, it's going to be fantastic. I of course have lots of picture credits because legal stuff. You got to. And then I would be happy to take your questions. So thanks very much. So thoughts, questions, comments on conflict without getting yourself in trouble. Yes?
I've been in a situation where we had a conflict between two groups.
Uh-huh.
And there was always conflict on story meeting, but the managers refused to take any actions. What would we do?
Yeah.
It's obviously clear that until the managers make some decision, we're developing both similar kind of frameworks, they will contradict in some ways. So some decision had to be taken, which was never taken.
Right.
What would we do as developers?
So what do you do with when you like manager or developer situation where one group needs to take action in order to move forward, but they don't? So some of it kind of depends on the specifics of that situation, but to me that sounds a little bit like a meeting with not much of an agenda and maybe not good minutes being taken, because if you're meeting and being like, oh, we need to, on the agenda is decide what to do about XYZ. And then you take notes and you say, like, manager number 1 says they'll do this, manager number 2 says they'll do this, manager number 3 says they'll do this. Cool, that's in the minutes. You send it out a couple of days before the next meeting. And then you basically are like, cool, so first on the agenda is reporting back on the things you said you'd do. And then it's like kind of makes it super uncomfortable and kind of weird to be like, yeah, I'm basically just going to week after week after week tell you I didn't do the thing I said I was going to do. So it's kind of this group accountability where, like, if you say you're going to do something, then do it. There's, with some caveats, if you suspect that the thing they said they could do, they either don't have the information or the background or the technical expertise to achieve, then it probably behooves you to offer in the interim, like, hey, I wanted to check how you're doing on that ginormous task that you took on last time at the meeting and see if there's anything that I could do to help or make it easier. I want to just make sure you have access to everything you need, all the information, etc. So that can, when you start to build like accountability in, then it makes it harder for people to be like, yeah, I said I'd do that this week and I didn't, again and again and again. So I would just say, hold people to a standard of accountability in the short version. Yes?
When I was very young, I had to learn civics as part of before I could graduate from high school or whatever.
Yeah.
Today I don't see people, including Congress, learning
Yeah.
How do you, if you're in a group that doesn't understand Robert's Rules of Orders or how to take notes and read notes and all that type of stuff, how do you teach civics these days?
So how do you teach civics? So one of the things that I do when I go to meetings that are like, we're just going to have a weekly unstructured hour of talking at each other, is I try to impose some structure on it. So I'll start at the beginning and say, like, it seems like we need to cover this, this, and this. What do you guys think? Or gals or people. And then they'll get like, oh, yeah, well, yeah, I have an item 4 to add maybe. And then kind of say like, cool, okay, great. And then just you sort of have to gently facilitate in a peer-to-peer way, like, oh, yeah, hey, Matt, that sounds like it goes to point 2. I just want to make sure we're done, we're finished with agenda item 1. If you could just hang on to that for a minute. So that's like, so you can just kind of like model helping people, politely helping people stay on topic as you go through, and then you take the notes. So you may have to model it for a while first before you can get everybody else to do it. So, but it's, technologically we have, you can do wikis, you could do an Etherpad, and you can have all these things, collaborative note-taking, so it's pretty easier than it used to be to kind of share this task of taking notes and keeping track of what the agenda is. It used to be one person was writing it in their handwriting, and, but no one has good handwriting anymore either, in addition to not knowing civics. But, so you probably have to model it first, I guess is the short answer, and then hope to get folks on. So you might say like, oh, hey, I gotta, you could even try saying like, I got the UPS guy, like, could someone else take minutes for a few? I'll be back on the call in a minute. So like sometimes you can like just give it off in short bits.
You mean like training wheels?
Yeah, training wheels, exactly. In the back.
I'm curious just how you have seen people deal with, just to set up my question, it feels like a lot of the conflict resolution techniques to deal with situations are potentially predicated on somebody having the personality to actually carry out those sort of step-ins or conversations. How do you deal with that kind of situation? Somebody who wants to conflict resolve but really doesn't have the personality to do so.
Ooh. So what do you do when you want to conflict resolve, but the person doesn't have the personality to do it? That's tricky because I'm not certain that I believe that no one is that anyone is 100% incapable of doing some of these things. But it's possible that you could, if you were feeling kind of like, oh, I'm not a extrovert person, I don't feel okay stepping in, it's like makes me maybe physically uncomfortable to confront people on things, you could try pointing to an outside resource and suggesting that people, like, hey, it seems like maybe we should read this before the next meeting and see if we could implement some of that, so that maybe not calling out people individually, like, stop being jerks to each other, It seemed like you have something to add.
Yeah, I think maybe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be, but I think kind of what he was getting at is it's less the super shy person who feels very physically uncomfortable, and he was more talking about like the Severus Snape kind. And I love Severus Snape, but there are but you know exactly what I mean. There are some people who, for whatever their situation may be, but they made the decision and they're stubborn as a mule that they're going to be absolutely intractable and you like stubborn as a mule. You cannot make these people budge. So how do you deal with these people?
They're hard.
In their head, they cannot be part of that process, and you can't force them to be part of that process.
You can't force anyone to do anything, but you don't have to keep them in your project either. So you don't have to keep everyone. If you have one person that is making it miserable to be part of your project for 99 people, they have to go. And you can give them an opportunity to change their behavior. So I might say, like, hey, Severus, I don't know if you realize this, but every time you get on the mailing list and call people names, it makes our newcomers not want to come back. It makes our longtime project members not want to be part of the conversation. And it's really hurting us from like not just a recruitment standpoint, but a technical standpoint, because nobody wants to discuss what they're doing. What do you think we should do about that? And they might be like, F you, nothing, because I'm that good. And then you might be like, I don't think this is the right place for you then. That's tough, but it's not as tough as getting rid of the other 99 people and just you and Severus hanging out all day. One in the back.
So kind of related to that, I feel like a lot of the things you've been talking about here are where people are kind of discussing things in good faith. And trying to be productive and move forward together. But some of the things that you've talked about where people are taking certain actions, like ad hominem attacks, are when they're actually acting in bad faith.
Yeah.
And the entire purpose of derailing things is to prevent people from moving forward.
Right, so how do you...
suggestions for how to approach that?
Approach... Yeah, kind of what I just said, like, when you call people names, like, it really hurts the project. And the rest of us are here to build a great operating system that people want to use. And you're making it kind of miserable for everyone else to be here.
Well, but what if you're not the person in charge?
You can...
You talk to the person who is, right?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on how formally structured your thing is. If you have a mechanism for taking grievances, and you part of your code of conduct is like, one person gets to hear all the complaints, then go give the complaints to that person. If they don't want to deal with it, then you might need a new person to handle all the complaints, or you might decide after several months of, politely, in good faith, bringing your grievances to the person who has been designated to hear those, decide that you want to be part of another community. I would say they probably don't deserve you after a certain number of times of trying to make it better for people. And there are lots and lots of projects. If you want suggestions of a project where people are nice, let me know. I'll make some suggestions for you. In the front.
Yeah, thanks. First, I love that you implement like the bad apple solution. There's a really rotten apple in the group. They gotta be alienated or gotta go. But I have a actually particular question because you mentioned volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard for a volunteer that in terms of sometimes their time is taken for granted because they are working for free.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have, like, when you're a paid employee, you have the leverage of, I cost money, make my, like, the person paying you wants to make
I'm the
their-
squeaky wheel because I'm getting paid here.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
for volunteers, sometimes it happens that their time just gets taken for granted.
Mhm.
That, you know, they're free labor anyway. Just make them do something that I'm sure will work eventually.
Mm-hmm.
As a volunteer, like, what do you do? What's your leverage?
What's your leverage? So I would say your leverage as a volunteer when you feel like you're not being appreciated is I would go and say, because I assume if one volunteer is feeling unappreciated and taken for granted, that probably another 10 also feel that way and just left without saying anything. So one, you're more of a canary in the mine shaft than you think. If you're willing to consider going and saying something about it and say, like, you know, a lot of people have left the project this year, and I would guess that in part some of them left for the same reason that I'm pretty unhappy with my experience at this project. Because they don't feel appreciated, they don't have any say in the governance of the project, like, you know, you never thank the translators on the release notes, whatever it is. And we thank all our translators on our release notes at Media Goblin. That's, but yeah, I think that is your leverage, and then it's possible to have, I think, projects that get big enough, huh?
The leverage to speak up, that's what you're saying?
Yeah, is speak up, or, you know, it could be an email. Like, if you feel like you're like, I feel too emotional about this, maybe I'll write it down and have a friend read it and make sure I've, you know, come across in a calm way, you know, if that's, you know, calm and logical.
Those are your two friends.
Yeah. So it's and say, you know, and I would say as a volunteer, say that you suspect other volunteers feel the same way. You don't have to rope anyone in on your specific thing, but if you're feeling unappreciated as a volunteer on a project, I doubt you're the only one. So, and that means that it's not just like, oh, I'm going to take my ball and go home, and it's like, people have been taking their balls and going home for a while. Like, you know, it's a whole shed full out back. So it's, yeah, so I think, and that's the thing too, is that if you're in a community that doesn't value its volunteers in general, then it might not be the right community. There are other communities that appreciate the heck out of their volunteers, and you are not getting paid. You don't have to worry about a severance package, so you can vote with your feet.
Because as a volunteer, if you're not getting paid, you want to get something.
Yeah.
Very often it's, you know, your impact on the project.
Right.
And if you're forced to do something that has no impact, then
Nope.
it comes out to fluff.
Yeah. I would say find a new project if you have tried to say, like, hey, I'm not feeling so great about my volunteering here anymore. If you feel like you've put in enough effort and time that they want to give them another chance to make it right, do it. But if they don't, I say find another project. Was there one in the red sweater?
So I have a question about possibly like the inverse of kind of the bad apple. When you have a group of people who really work really well together, but then there's one person who necessarily is not a bad apple, but they are finding conflict, and I've found that what happens to the rest of the group is they kind of turn into or feel like they're being bullies because they don't interact well with that one person who's finding all this conflict and it is not clicking as well. But their intent is not to be the bully.
Yeah, so like just because they maybe come from a shared cultural background and then this other person is sort of a little orthogonal to that.
And not necessarily in an aggressive way. Like maybe it's a whole group and no one's aggressive.
Yeah.
But there's that.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I guess one of the thing there, that one's a tricky one, but I think the project needs to ask itself, like, is our goal growth? And if our goal is growth, then it means we need to be less monoculture. And that means if you have a project that's only one person doesn't fit, then there's probably a lot more monoculture than you're admitting to. And so, and sadly, this happens too in all kinds of organizations where they have like one token outside person, and that person switches out every year or 6 months. And so that's probably a situation, yeah, where like a shared cultural background is being valued a little bit out of proportion to the work that's being done. So depending on the thing, it might make sense to maybe try and formalize the way that gratitude and appreciation is given so that it's a little bit more mechanical. So you might, maybe you would have a leaderboard on your site for patch review and for lines of code and for lines of translated documentation or something like that, so that you can see clearly like what people are offering to the community, as opposed to just being like, oh, well, we never talked to her, so I don't know what she's up to, but I know what you're up to because we just sat down and had coffee yesterday and we had beers yesterday, so everyone can see like this is what people are contributing to the community. So yeah, that's like as a general question, I think formalizing the way that appreciation and gratitude is given might be the best way to go for a project like that. Yeah. Over here.
I'm wondering if there's techniques for prevention. I don't wait for my car to break down. I check the oil,
Yeah.
I check the air pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So is there ways before conflict blows up,
Mm-hmm.
like early detector?
Yeah, so, and that would be as far as like the expectation setting is key there, and having the code of conduct, but also, and this gets a little bit more into like kind of community management generally, is you should be having conversations with people on a fairly regular basis who contribute to your project. What's
it look like?
So you could just be like, hey, Tuesday's office hours, or you could just be like, I have a list, like I ping everyone, like maybe you have a weekly meeting and you're like, I'm going to rotate through the 4 people I work with really directly and be like, hey, we're doing our weekly IRC meeting. If you could hang out for 5 minutes after, I'd love to just check in with you on your work. And then you just kind of make it like you're always the first Monday of the month and you're always the second Monday and you're always, So that would be one way that you could do it, so that you make sure that people are a regular check-in. And that makes it kind of normal, which is good, because if you're, if you're like, hey, Kevin, we should check in, and it's never happened, Kevin's gonna be like, what's going on? I screwed up, I stepped in it, uh-ohs. But if it's a regular thing and you just kind of say like, oh, hey, Kevin, I'm so glad you've started contributing. I try to check in with everybody about once a month, and so this is the first time. I just want, like, how's the process going? How's contributing to our project going? You can always come to me if you've got something in between our monthly thing. So that's like, it's a little bit more work, but it's certainly less work than going out and replacing people who left and didn't tell you they were going to ghost on you. So, yeah. Awesome. Anything else? You have another one?
Yeah.
Awesome.
You mentioned the accountability.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes hard to keep track of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And, software, open source software for like project management accountability. Do you have recommendations? Or free?
I don't care. So accountability, it depends. I mean, like I said, you kind of ask people like, oh, would you be willing to take this on? And if they say yes, then you hold them to it and sort of remain assumptive that you expect them to take it on.
I mean, this is part of a bigger question of people who are underperforming, not dealing with. So it's like, and project is big and a lot of responsibilities, and it's like it's hard to even provide them the adequate feedback that they are underperforming for them to fully realize it. So it's like,
yeah, and that gets into employee management a little bit more, which is probably its own whole discussion. But I would say, like, in some, like, doing the check-in, but maybe saying, like, hey, like, it seemed like that was sort of frustrating. You could kind of try to ask a leading, like, do you want to talk about what went on, or, so that's, I think, if they're like, well, what do you mean? And it's like, oh, well, it seemed like you were going to do it in 2 weeks and then it took 4. And I don't know if it was just like that process was trickier than you were expecting, or, or maybe they're like,
problem. Like a reoccurring.
Oh, and there, it's like, oh, you just always miss your deadlines. So then that one might be like, yeah, so we have like release dates, and it's very hard for us to stay on track when you are consistently not making the deadlines you've committed to. How can I help you meet those deadlines? Like, do we need to split your tasks into like two people's things, or is there a bottleneck somewhere that I'm not seeing? You know, so you kind of just like assuming the best, but being like, hey, it really hurts everybody else when you don't meet your deadlines. I want to help you, but you got to tell me what is going to help. And if they're like, yeah, I just had a kid and I don't have as much time, sorry, I keep over committing. And it's like, that's fine, awesome. We'll roll back this stuff, and when you send them to college, like, you know, or kindergarten, whatever, if you're the primary, whatever, then we'll load you back up. It's fine. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of there can be a little bit of people might feel ashamed to go from like star contributor, I was unemployed and I was contributing like 40 hours a week, and now I gotta roll back because they enjoyed being that person. And then it's like, oh, I'll see if I can cram in both. And it's like, you can't, but like, you know, so you kind of gotta like set a path for what the next thing is. Like, you know, like it's cool, you can't do 40 hours a week anymore. I would love it if you could write down some of your experiences so that we can focus on getting people to pick up the parts that you're gonna have to pass to the next person. So, you know, like it's hard to without the specific, yeah. So anyway, I think we have time for one more, and then.
How do you address too much phone time and then like stretching their lunch hour and trying to making rules every, you know, going over and over things.
Mm-hmm. So stretching phone time. So I could probably do a whole talk on meetings actually, but after you've got the agenda items, I like to put the number of minutes I think each agenda item should take. And then when you get, so if you're like 10 minutes on deciding, you know, when our next release date is or whatever, and then if you get to like 9 minutes in and the conversation is still going full force, then you got to say, so we allotted 10 minutes for this. Do we want to take time away from one of the other topics? Sometimes that will get people to like, all right, zip it with the anecdotes and make a decision. And if you get people in the habit of knowing that you expect them to stay to the agenda and the time allotted, that they will.
This is actually like people using their phone too much during work. You know.
Oh. Yeah, that's like another like kind of employee management one. I think you have to say like it's, you know, I know sometimes people have like periods in their life when they need to be on the phone a lot. If there's something going on, let me know and maybe we can like help accommodate you. But otherwise it makes other people feel, you know, like they're working harder when you're on the phone a lot. That's where I would go with that one. But I haven't worked at a workplace with phones for a little while. So anyway, thank you so much, guys, and you know, enjoy the rest of the fest.